The exposure of media violence is an exceedingly contemporary issue in our society. It is present everywhere in our everyday lives, from being on TV, in video games, in advertisements, and magazines, etc. As the wide variety of media are becoming increasingly accessible, researchers have taken a step further in an attempt to answer the question of the major debate: whether or not exposure to media violence increases an individual's likelihood of engaging in violent behavior. An article from APA.org titled "Childhood Exposure to Media Violence Predicts Young Adult Aggressive Behavior," according to a new 15-year study, was written by Dr. L. Raoul Huesman on March 9, 2003. This article articulates the relationship between childhood exposure to media violence and the aggression levels in adulthood, in which is most relevant compared to the other two references to the debatable topic. Furthermore, this article was written based on research Dr. L. Raoul Huesman conducted himself, involving a longitudinal study on aggressive behavior in a group of participants. The reason I chose this reference out of the three I had was because longitudinal studies are more relevant to the topic, as the effects of media violence on individuals are more likely to be evident over a certain time period to fully determine the impact. Through the years since this debatable topic, only a few studies have been examined from childhood to adulthood. Therefore, Dr. L. Raoul Huesman began his research in examining a sample of participants from the 1970s and 1980s and the longitudinal relationship between exposure to media violence at children aged 6 to 10 and then their levels of aggression in adulthood 15 years later. The study conducted was published in his report Longitudinal Relations Between Children's Exposure to TV Violence and Their Aggressive and Violent Behavior in Young Adulthood, 1977 to 1992, which was co-written with Jessica Moyes-Titus, Cheryl Lynn Podolsky, and Leonard D. Aron from the University of Michigan. The reason and rationale for the study was to determine the correlation between childhood exposure to media violence and the level of aggression in adulthood, regardless of their intellectuality and social status, according to their parents' level of education and occupation. The aim of the experiment was to confirm the hypothesis that the more a child is exposed to media violence, the more he or she will be engaged in violent aggressive behavior. This longitudinal study was conducted in two time periods of the participants' lives. The first during their childhood period when they were in years 1, 2, 3, or 4, and the second study 15 years later. In the first time period of the study in the years 1977 and 1978, 557 child participants aged 6 to 10 years old from public schools located in Oak Park, Illinois, and from the two parochial schools in the Chicago area were examined twice or more. In this experiment, three main questions were asked. For the first question, the child participants were given 8 lists of 10 TV shows they were exposed to and were asked to rate them according to a every time it's on, a lot but not always, or once in a while scale. Second, whether or not they related to the aggressive characters with the scale 0 to 2, 0 being not at all and 2 being a lot. And third, whether or not they found the violent situations present in the TV shows realistic, by asking them with the question, how true do you think this program is in telling what life is really like? In which the child participants had to rate on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being not at all like it is in real life, or 3 being it is just like real life. In addition to the survey, the researchers measured the child participants' aggressive behavior levels through asking each child participant to report which child was engaged in the most aggressive behavior during playtime, with acts such as initiation of fights, pushing, and shoving. The way the researchers used to calculate the aggression levels of the participants was a highly reliable method, which was used internationally with a consistency of 97%. This was done by summing up the number of aggressive acts the child was said to have displayed by his peers, divided by the total number of students doing the ratings. Similarly, the child participants' parents' status, including their occupation and education levels were measured as a considering factor for the study. Their education levels were recorded through a self-report and was used as a measure of SES. Their aggression levels on a scale of 4 to 9, having choked, punched, or beaten another adult, had slapped or kicked another adult, or had threatened or actually cut someone with a knife, or threatened or shot someone with a gun, were also recorded. Other factors that were used to measure their aggression levels were fantasizing about aggression, rejection of the child, nurturance of the child, harsh punishment of the child, mobility orientation, parents' TV viewing frequency, and lastly, parents' TV violence viewing. Out of the 557 participants, 329 of them were resurveyed 15 years later, in which they were asked about the type of TV shows they enjoy as adults. This was done by their reporting on their 3 favorite regularly aired programs. These 3 programs were measured on a scale of 0 to 4, 0 being no camera violence and 4 being high visible violence. This was done through personal or phone interviews. Other questions asked in a self-report were, how often do you give the finger to others? How often do you start a fight over nothing? And how often do you take other people's things without them asking? Which was measured on a scale of 0 to 4, 0 being never and 4 being very often. A severe aggression scale was also used in the self-report, which included questions like the amount of times the participant has choked, punched, or beaten another adult, had slapped or kicked another adult, or had threatened or actually cut someone with a knife, or threatened to shot at someone with a gun. Measures like how frequently they choked their spouse and their antisocial aggressive personality were also taken into account. Besides their individual opinions about their own aggressive behavior, friends and families of the 326 participants were also interviewed and were asked to state the frequency of the participants' engagement in aggressive behavior. Any recorded state archives, including criminal convictions and traffic violations of the participants, were made into account by the researchers to obtain results. The results showed that out of all the male participants in the study, the men who were exposed to higher levels of violence on TV in their childhood were more likely to have displayed aggressive behavior, such as pushing, grabbing, and shoving their spouses, to have responded to an insult by shoving the person in their adulthood. The female participants who were exposed to higher levels of violence on TV in their childhood were more likely to have displayed aggressive behavior, such as throwing something at their spouses, to have responded to someone who made them mad by shoving, punching, beating, or choking the person. Such participants were found to have engaged in and have been convicted of criminal acts. For men, more than 3 times over the other male participants, and for women, more than 4 times over the other female participants. The researchers concluded that the frequencies and correlations in the results determined that childhood exposure to media violence is highly related to aggression in adulthood, regardless of the child's initial aggressiveness, intellectuality, or the social standing and level of education of the parents. The amount of participants interviewed 15 years later was significantly less than the original 557. This was due to the complexity of locating and recontacting the original participants. This may have had a slight effect on the results. Furthermore, a larger amount of participants from a variety of locations should be used in order to achieve results more applicable to a wider range of people. However, on average, this study was successful in determining the positive correlation between childhood exposure to media violence and adult aggression. Thank you.